Welcome, fellow travelers of the forgotten roads and wanderers of wilds, to the verdant enclave. I'm your host, and sometimes friendly DM. More relevant to today's discussion, I'm also your fellow wanderer and wilderness guide to the Ranger class of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning from the last few videos, thank you for continuing on this journey into the Ranger class with me. Last week, we discussed the Level 1 features Favored Foe and Natural Explorer, both of which are non-combat and non-social abilities, but rather enable and enhance the Ranger's involvement with exploration, the third pillar of the game. Favored Foe adds a free language, free advantage to certain abilities related to your selected enemy type. Natural Explorer enables the Ranger to scout, travel, be alert, maneuver the party, and be a force multiplier, as well as giving the Ranger a far broader application of the Rogue's expertise feature. If you want to hear the details, please feel free to check out the other video. For now, let's move on to Level 2. While the fighter class gets their fighting style, and a broader range of those, at Level 1, the Ranger now at Level 2 moves from focusing primarily on exploration and intelligence gathering, to now adding a focus to their own combat skills. For the fighter, choices are fairly simple. Make one choice at Level 1, and build your character around that choice. This makes the fighter simple to design, build, and survive. One of the things I like most about the Ranger is the customizability of the class. Unfortunately, this is also one of the problems with the class. The Ranger has so many choices to make that it introduces multiple fail points for your character build, unless players pay attention and keep their focus on what the Ranger's style and overall theme and intention of your character is. Here, somewhat more than the Level 1 features, is one of those potential fail points. Let's track down these styles and what themes they suggest for a Ranger build. Archery is a fantastic and strong mechanical boost to all ranged attacks, and it applies to bows, crossbows, slings, but not thrown weapons. Choosing this style turns your Ranger into a medieval sniper, and you will likely want to stay back from the main combat, concentrating your attacks on one enemy in particular until they go down. This is one way that you can focus on having your attacks, enhancing your chance to hit, protecting yourself, and also choosing spells that rely on bonus actions. Defense is a quiet style that, rather than offer offensive power, focuses on enhancing your survivability. This can be worked into your armor class calculation to support you turning your Ranger into a tank, where you position yourself to block access to your allies, and hold a war of attrition to see how long you survive compared to your enemies. If you focus on this style, you will have to consider how and when you cast your spells, especially if those spells require somatic components, or hand movements, because if you have one weapon and one shield equipped, you cannot cast somatic spells. Dueling, flavor-wise, suggests that you know where to plant your weapon to cause the most damage, and can be used with a shield to achieve a balance between good defense and good offensive power, though you don't enhance your chance to hit like you do with archery. As with defense, there is a bit of potential conflict with some spells, as there are spells that require somatic components, the ability to wave at least one hand, but overall, Dueling makes you a fairly balanced fighter between defense and offense. Two-weapon fighting draws a lot of criticism, but it really is not a bad fighting style. Like Dueling, this style focuses less on casting and more on fighting, but now sacrifices defense for added potential damage. It also has some timing issues, as you can draw only one weapon on your turn at a time. But there are some interesting ways to work around this. For example, after rolling initiative, you could use your bonus action to cast a spell, your movement to get behind cover, and your action to then draw both weapons out. On your next turn, having prepared yourself, you move into battle from behind your cover, blades swinging. Alternatively, you could draw a weapon and take cover, then use your action to cast a spell, and on your next turn, then draw your second weapon, move, and go on the attack. Remember that dropping items does not require any interaction. If your enemy flees and gets beyond your reach, you can drop your swords and use your interaction to draw your bow and your action to shoot. Beware that dropping your weapons means you should remember to retrieve them if you want to continue fighting, which means using your interaction, consequently not being able to stow your bow. Of course, there's the obvious option of taking dual wielder feat, to be able to draw both weapons at once. But remember that you cannot always rely on feats. They are optional, and your DM may or may not allow feats at their table. So it's wise to consider how you would make your choices work depending on circumstances. Oh, speaking of circumstances, at second level, your ranger gains spellcasting, 2 spells and 2 spell slots. Now, conventional wisdom will inform you that the only spellcasting you need to do as a ranger is Hunter's Mark, and full stop there. This is really poor advice, and vastly underestimates ranger spells. First, remember that the ranger is a half caster. They have magic, but they don't need to rely on it in the same ways that sorcerers, wizards, clerics, druids, bards, and warlocks do. Simply put, the ranger just does not have enough spell slots at early levels to fully rely on them for damage. Second, because rangers don't need to rely on their spells for damage output quite as much, it means they can choose spells that augment physical attributes, alter the playing field in some way, or support defenses. It ultimately comes down to how you want to theme your ranger. Let's take a look at what the player's handbook provides for spells options. Yes, I know Tasha's and Xanathar's exist, but those are optional books, and your DM may or may not allow them at the table. So, at least for now, I'll be focusing solely on player's handbook options and address supplementary material in later videos. After all, if the base ranger class is misunderstood, how can we reliably make solid choices with their extended options? So, let's establish a solid foundation first and build up from there. For damaging spells, a ranger has their choice of Ensnaring Strike, Hail of Thorns, and Hunter's Mark. I'd like to mention here that I actually really like Hunter's Mark as a spell. It has no attack roll, no saving throw, adds damage, and even has out-of-combat applications. For example, marking a non-favored foe in order to gain advantage on tracking them down later. And it has a long duration, as long as you can keep concentration going. But it isn't as great, or as necessary as common wisdom would have you believe. If you really want to capitalize on damage, then you would want to use this spell when you have as many attacks as possible, which at this level would be 2-weapon fighting. But concentration spells are really easy to lose in melee combat. It also means that you have to concentrate on one particular enemy at a time. You cannot change your focus to another target until your marked target goes down. For defensive spells, the Ranger gets Alarm and Cure Wounds. Considering how few slots the Ranger has for spells at this level, I like Alarm for the fact that it lasts long enough for a long rest, and helps protect your entire party. Having said that, the time I played a Ranger, I did not take Alarm. Instead, I bought some fishing gear, some silver bells, and used the fishing line as a tripwire, from which I hung the bells by fishing hooks. And my DM was really amazing at rewarding that choice by having enemies constantly ringing the bells when they were trying to sneak up on us. Just be sure to set your tripwires on avenues of approach. Meanwhile, Cure Wounds is a great emergency tool for bringing up a downed companion, but don't expect it to be a good mid-combat spell, and if there are other healers in the party, let them focus on these types of spells. Alternatively, buy a healer's kit for 10 gold. For utility spells, the Ranger's options increase dramatically. Animal Friendship, Detect Magic, Detect Poison and Disease, Fog Cloud, Jump, Longstrider, and Speak with Animals. Of these listed, my personal favorite is Longstrider, followed by Fog Cloud, and then Jump. If you really want a thorough breakdown of the Fog Cloud spell, I suggest you check out Treant Monk's Temple, as he offers really in-depth analysis of all sorts of different spells, classes, and features. But I have used Fog Cloud to devastating effect for my DM, because its simplest, yet biggest effects are the absolute removal of all sight-related spells, abilities, and the cancelling out of all advantage and disadvantage on the battlefield. Longstrider is another deceptively simple spell, but its effects can be surprisingly versatile. For the cost of one spell slot, you grant a plus 10 speed bonus to a creature you touch for 1 hour. Riding on a horse to escape an enemy or to pursue a quarry, all of a sudden your horse is moving faster than your opponent's. Have a melee fighter in the party who struggles to reach the fight? You just became their speed boost and best friend. I've used this spell to get myself into a fight sooner than I would have otherwise, but more impressively, to get a rogue into the fight sooner. Here's the scene. The rogue and my ranger were next to each other, too far away from a fight to bring aid to the wizard inside of 2 rounds. The ranger could have cast Longstrider on himself, but still would not have been able to affect anything until the next round. The rogue could have cunning action dashed, but would still have to dash again in order to get in range, and then would not have been able to attack. So instead, the ranger cast Longstrider on the Wood Elf rogue, giving the rogue a speed of 45 feet. The rogue then cunning action dashed 90 feet, getting to just within sight of the enemy, and landing their shot with sneak attack damage. Even better, when upcast, Longstrider affects 1 extra creature per level of spell. So a second level spell, Longstrider can boost 2 creatures simultaneously. And finally, after all of that, the final exceptional feature of this spell, it's concentration free. Compare that to Hunter's Mark. You must spend your spell slot, your concentration, and lock it onto 1 creature, on whom you must then also land attacks in order to gain the benefits of the spell, only moving the spell once the first target is reduced to 0 hit points. You can keep concentrating for it to last an hour to have some of that out of combat utility, gaining advantage on tracking the marked quarry, and it is a thematically wonderful spell. Mechanically, it leaves me wanting, however, when compared to the Longstrider spell. Now, It is true that Hunter's Mark adds 1d6 of damage to every weapon attack you make that hits your marked target. And depending on how many attacks you have, this can be a really nice little pool of added damage, and I have no problem with increasing the damage I can do to my target. But given the general opinion on this spell, how does it match up in actual gameplay? Remember that the conventional wisdom suggests that the only way for a ranger to be comparable in damage is to use Hunter's Mark. In order to answer this question, I will actually take Hunter's Mark on my ranger character, along with Longstrider. Now, I have heard that some people don't like how few spell options the ranger has, or that they wish the ranger had no magic at all. This isn't something I'm going to focus on a great deal, as these are more perspective or preference based. What I enjoy particularly about ranger spellcasting is the fact that the spells can be used to guide the theme of your ranger. For example, you could take all the damage type spells, and if you went ranged combat with archery, you could treat your spells and bow as a sort of Batman type ranger, with stealth skills, knowledge and tracking, and a utility belt carrying different batarangs for different scenarios. Or you could focus on utility spells, and combined with melee combat, you suddenly have a speedster who can also have a fog, which prevents any attacks of opportunity. Maybe you have abilities to detect magic, poisonous creatures, poison, or disease, communicate with animals, treat injuries, and cover a wide range of abilities. A strength-built melee ranger, with the jump and Longstrider spell combined, can cover a lot of ground rapidly, and suddenly be a lot closer to enemy spellcasters despite enemies being in the way. Look beyond the additional damage Hunter's Mark adds, and consider the different ways the other spells can amplify not only the ranger, but the party as a whole. Or play a vengeance-built ranger and take Hunter's Mark, so you can really lean into the sniper role of the archer and pile on the damage. It is a good spell, and you won't be disappointed with it, but we'll see how necessary it is, or isn't, for making damage comparable. Having said all of that, I'm sure that some of you would like to know how the first level damage comparison went between the fighter and the ranger. Here I have to go into some details first. I mentioned earlier Treant Monk's Temple's channel, which is also where I learned how to calculate for expected average damage in Dungeons & Dragons, but also how to establish a baseline for comparison basis. On screen, you will see the baseline as established by Treant Monk's Temple, which is fairly simple. Check out his channel and videos if you want to learn more details. For my purposes, I kept my recording simple and to the point. I recorded the number of attacks each character made, how many times the attacks hit, and the damage rolled for each attack regardless of how much actually affected enemies. In other words, I disregarded resistance and hit point totals, since most players won't know the hit point total of their enemies anyway, and resistance occurs comparatively few times to the sheer number of enemies you'll be facing. With those details out of the way, let's compare the fighter at level 1 to the baseline, remembering that the fighter gains their fighting style at level 1, which in this case is a +2 to all ranged attacks. The baseline average damage per hit is 5.675, while the fighter in this case did a total of 44 points of damage at level 1, divided over 6 hits out of 7 attacks, works out to 7.33 points of damage per hit. Well done, fighter. So, what about the ranger? Bearing in mind that the ranger does not have a fighting style at level 1. In this gameplay, the ranger did a total of 66 points of damage at level 1, divided over 10 hits out of 11 attacks, works out to 6.6 points of damage per hit. So we can see that the ranger and the fighter, both on average, outdid the baseline. But on cumulative damage for the level, over the course of 3 fights, the ranger actually outdid the fighter, though the fighter was higher on the average. Should be interesting to see what occurs during level 2 when the ranger gains a fighting style as well as spells. I hope you'll join me for more exploration and to see how the fighter and ranger continue to compare in combat. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.